On the 17th of October 1967, a man lay dying of kidney cancer at the anti-imperialist hospital of Beijing in the People's Republic of China. Surrounded by the overwhelming sounds of the Communist Cultural Revolution, he reminisces the events of his lifetime. His name is Aisingioro Puyi, and he was the last emperor of China. November 1908, twilight of the Qing dynasty. The 72-year-old Empress Dowager Cixi is dying. This woman, nicknamed the Dragon Lady, has been the true master of imperial China for the last 47 years, thanks to the strategic use of child emperors as puppets. The latest of them, her nephew Emperor Guangxu, was crowned in 1875 at 3 years old. As he grew up, he however aimed to massively reform the conservative empire. Empress Dowager Cixi opposed these changes and, wishing to stay in power, staged a coup, placing Emperor Guangxu under house arrest, and continued to rule the nation in his stead with an iron fist. In November 1908, aware of her imminent death, she organized the assassination of Emperor Guangxu to prevent him from reclaiming power. The emperor, however, did not have a son. As there was no heir presumptive, a new son of heaven had to be selected. Once again, Cixi planned to choose another child. A perfect candidate was available, 2-year-old Puyi. The boy was the son of Daifang, Prince Chun, who had inherited this title from his late father, Yixuan, a fervent supporter and ally of Cixi, and father of late Emperor Guangxu. Yixuan himself was a son of Emperor Daoguang, which legitimized Puyi's imperial bloodline. Furthermore, Puyi's mother, Youlan, was the daughter of Zhonglu, a high-ranking Qing official who had been Cixi's champion and rumoured lover. The night before poisoned Emperor Guangxu died, Cixi dispatched a procession of eunuchs and imperial guards from the Forbidden City to Daifang's residence to collect his son, little Puyi. Upon learning that their eldest son was adopted into the Forbidden City, Daifang and his wife Youlan were shocked, but powerless to protest the imperial decision. Since the child was only 2 years old, his wet nurse was permitted to come along to the Forbidden City. At dawn, the procession had returned to the palace. Puyi was taken to see the Empress Dowager, who he later recalled as a hideous figure. She died the following day, on the 15th of November 1908. As the infant's coronation was prepared, several figures received new titles for the new era. Cixi's niece, Jingfan, the wife of late Emperor Guangxu, became the new Empress Dowager, Longyu. Daifang, Puyi's father, was appointed as a regent for his son. They would together take the reins of the Qing dynasty. On the 2nd of December 1908, Puyi was crowned as Emperor Xuantong in an immense traditional ceremony of the Qing dynasty at the age of 2 years old. He was the youngest emperor in the history of the Qing dynasty. The boy was said to have been very distraught by the racket of the ceremony and cried during the whole event. Nonetheless, Puyi was now the son of heaven. As such, he would be pampered and spoilt by eunuchs and palace maids during his early childhood. However, he was separated from his mother, Youlan, since following the Qing imperial tradition, all former imperial concubines, including Empress Dowager Longyu, had become Puyi's symbolic mothers. As he grew up, he was forced to visit them regularly and reportedly despised them. In addition to Longyu leading the imperial harem, there were 5 other concubines of past emperors, whose titles were at the time Imperial Noble Consort Qi, concubine of late Emperor Xianfang, Imperial Noble Consort Xun, Imperial Noble Consort Yu, and Noble Consort Jin, concubines of Emperor Tongzhi, and finally Noble Consort Jin of late Emperor Guangxu. In 1910, as he was 4 years old, Puyi's formal education began. 2 tutors were appointed to teach him the Confucian classics, Chen Baochen, and Lu Junxiang, prominent scholars of the times. The child emperor's younger brother, Puyi, although living at their father's residence house, would later be taken to the Forbidden City to partake in these lessons and would also become Puyi's playmate. As a child emperor, Puyi received anything he demanded and rapidly became spoiled. He developed sadistic tendencies, frequently ordering eunuchs to be flogged or punished for minor or no real offences. Reportedly, he would only obey his wet nurse, who by now had essentially replaced his mother. Meanwhile, the government of the empire was in crisis. Since the 19th century, the Qing dynasty had become more and more unpopular in the eyes of the Chinese people. Many secret societies aimed to overthrow it. Some wished to restore a Han Chinese empire, although many, inspired by the West, wanted a republic. The plot to assassinate Regent Taifeng was exposed, and many failed uprisings arose everywhere. Taifeng had no real government skills. Furthermore, he had been persuaded by members of his close family to appoint them to many positions of power they were not qualified for. In October 1911, an uprising of the imperial army in Wuchang succeeded. It gradually developed into the Xinhai Revolution. The revolutionary leaders, headed by Dr. Sun Yat-sen, advocated making China a republic and a modernized country, claiming the conservative Qing dynasty was obsolete. In the following weeks, they successfully captured more and more territory in the south of the empire. In the Forbidden City, although 5-year-old Emperor Puyi did not realize it, the overwhelmed Qing imperial court was in chaos, unable to handle the issue. They needed a natural leader and capable strategist. Subsequently, an old figure would re-emerge from the shadows. General Yuan Shikai, master of the Beiyang army, the best drilled and modernized force of the empire, was called back into the picture. Yuan Shikai had been sentenced to exile by Regent Taifeng since he had betrayed his brother Emperor Guangxu during Cixi's coup in 1898. However, in the face of the current situation, Taifeng reluctantly agreed to have Yuan brought back to the imperial court. The general was appointed as Prime Minister of the Imperial Cabinet on the 16th of November and promised to crush the rebellion. 2 weeks later, Taifeng resigned from his position of regent. From then on, he would devote his attention to his family and stay away from politics, leaving all official power in Empress Dowager Long Yu's hands. Yuan Shikai and his Beiyang army brought a drawback to the Xinhai Revolution. However, he had no loyalty to the empire and secretly started negotiating with the Republican rebels. In exchange for the position of president once the Republic would be established, he agreed to organize the abdication of Emperor Puyi and end the monarchy. Yuan Shikai then returned to Beijing and claimed the situation was hopeless. He pressured the court for permission to negotiate abdication terms. The imperial government, overwhelmed, agreed. The North-South Conference, settling the terms between the Empire and the rebels, took place on the 18th of December 1911, in exchange for an official end to the Empire and founding of a republic in its stead. The Republicans agreed to let the imperial court stay in the Forbidden City. The Forbidden City itself would continue functioning as usual, with a staff of eunuchs and palace maids, and an annual stipend of 4 million taels of silver from the new government, which also agreed to protect and maintain the imperial tombs of the dynasty. The Qing court was devastated. However, these terms were better than expected. On the 12th of February 1912, Empress Dowager Long Yu signed the official imperial edict of abdication of Puyi, the Emperor Xuantong. The Qing dynasty was no more. Most Qing politicians and high officials began serving the Republic under its now president Yuan Shikai or returned to civilian life. Besides some aristocratic families, very few remained loyal to the Qing. Trying to salvage the defunct monarchy's influence, some Manchu nobles founded the Royalist Party, essentially aiming to restore the Qing dynasty, which was secretly supported by the Japanese. It was headed by Shanqi, Prince Su, whose daughter would play a major role in Puyi's later life. But how did the deposed emperor react? For the child monarch, who was barely 6 years old, all these events didn't really change anything. No one informed him that China was now a republic, and since the Forbidden City itself kept operating as usual, he was still revered as the son of heaven and received a classical Confucian education by his tutors. In February 1913, Empress Dowager Longyu died at the age of 45 years old. President Yuan Shikai then came to the Forbidden City to pay his respects. In reality, the power-hungry general had other ambitions. He was aiming to restore a modern Han Chinese monarchy, which he would control as a new emperor. In parallel, child Puyi slowly came to understand that this man who in the past kowtowed before him now held more authority than him. He commanded soldiers, and everyone obeyed him. The deposed emperor realized he was no longer the head of state, and that China was now a republic. Puyi reportedly despised Yuan Shikai, branding him as a traitor. In late 1915, Yuan's preparations were complete, and he declared the founding of the Empire of China. This turned out to be a severe miscalculation, as the elite had had enough of monarchy. In the face of his allies abandoning him, and overwhelmingly negative popular sentiment, he had no choice but to abdicate after only 84 days, and died shortly after, in early 1916. With no strong central government left, the country descended into anarchy. In every province, local generals began acting independently, forming competing cliques that vied for control of Beijing to claim the presidency. The warlord era had begun. In the heart of the nation's capital city, the imperial court nervously observed the chaos from within the walls of the Forbidden City. In mid-1917, a peculiar general would enter the picture, Zhang. General Zhang was a Qing loyalist who had always refused to cut his queue after the Xinhai Revolution, a symbol of submission to the Qing dynasty. He further forbade his soldiers to do so as well. Taking advantage of yet another period of political chaos in Beijing, Zhang Xun seized the capital on the 1st of July and proclaimed the restoration of the Qing dynasty. An edict bringing back 11-year-old Puyi to the throne was immediately published, and within a few days, the dragon flag was once again flying everywhere in Beijing. A new imperial cabinet, headed by Zhang Xun, was formed, and it seemed as if the Qing dynasty was truly emerging once more. However, besides the capital, the Qing loyalists had no power whatsoever. Duan Qirui, the ousted premier of the republic, ordered a plane of the emerging Chinese Air Force to bomb the Forbidden City in a show of force. This terrorized the imperial court and killed an unfortunate eunuch. Duan Qirui then rallied his troops, and on the 12th of July, an all-out attack on Beijing was launched by the Republican forces. As a result, Zhang Xun fled, and the imperial court surrendered. The brief 2-week-long Manchu Restoration was over. Back in Republican hands, the government of China declared war on the Central Powers, joining the Allies in World War I. However, at the 1919 Paris Peace Conference, settling the war, the Central Powers' concessions in China were not returned to the nation, but instead granted to Japan. The Empire of Japan already controlled Dalian, Korea, and Taiwan, and was constantly trying to increase its influence. As a result, the May the 4th movement broke out, a nationwide massive student protest advocating Chinese nationalism and anti-imperialism. Cut off from all this chaos, 13-year-old Puyi would see his vision of the world rocked to the core as the Forbidden City received a new guest, Sir Reginald Johston. Johnston was a Scottish-born sinologist and British diplomat who had served in Hong Kong and British Wei since 1898. The Republican government appointed him as another tutor for the teenage emperor, who would now receive Western education in addition to Chen Baochun's Confucian teachings. Puyi and his teacher would rapidly grow fond of each other. The young monarch showed great focus and eagerness to learn English. Sir Johnston later recalled, "There are multitudes of English boys older than the Emperor who cannot write English as well as he can after 12 days' study." The new tutor's presence brought considerable changes to the Forbidden City. He introduced his student to the telephone, and Puyi, developing a fascination for modern technology, was enchanted by this. He reportedly spent much time phoning strangers in Beijing randomly. The Emperor also discovered cinema and promptly ordered the installation of a projection room to enjoy films inside the Forbidden City, to the contempt of many in the court. As Puyi gradually grew short-sighted, Sir Reginald Johnston had him examined by a Western doctor, who recommended that he should wear spectacles. For the imperial court, who already disapproved of Western technology, this was unacceptable. Puyi's father, Taifang, Prince Chun, argued that the emperor could not possibly wear spectacles. As a side note, a previous Qing emperor, Zhang, who was Puyi's great-great-great-great-grandfather, was fond of spectacles brought to him by Jesuit missionaries and regularly wore them. Eventually, Sir Johnston was able to convince the imperial court of the medical importance of the issue. Its members reluctantly accepted that Puyi could wear glasses. He would depend on them for the rest of his life. Puyi was extremely bored in the Forbidden City. He desperately wanted to escape and discover the outside world. He once unsuccessfully tried to contact people through his telephone to escape. An occasion to finally get out would present itself on the 30th of September 1921. It was however tragic. Youlan, Puyi's biological mother, committed suicide by swallowing opium. As she was dying, the emperor was allowed to visit her in his father Prince Chun's mansion to pay his respects. After this event, he had to return to the Forbidden City. In March 1922, when he was 16 years old, Puyi's life would be rocked once more. The now 4 remaining concubines of previous emperors, headed by Imperial Noble Consort Duankang, former Noble Consort Jin, decided it was time for him to be married. They subsequently began preparing the teenager's wedding. As the traditional concubine selection ceremony of the Qing dynasty could obviously no longer take place, the emperor was presented with photographs of young daughters of the defunct Qing dynasty's aristocracy. Puyi initially selected the daughter of a Mongol-bordered yellow banner family, named Wenxiao. However, Wenxiao was only 12 years old and disapproved of for the title of empress by Imperial Noble Consort Duankang. Puyi was therefore forced to reconsider. After more thinking, he eventually chose another girl. This was Wanrong, from the Manchu plain white banner, aged 15 years old. Puyi would however still marry Wenxiao as a secondary consort. A few months later, on the 21st of October 1922, the time for the actual wedding had come. The emperor would see his wives' faces for the first time. During the whole day, the lavish imperial ceremony took place, with exchanges of gifts, banquets, and entertainment. By the evening, Puyi, his now empress and his secondary consort, entered the Palace of Earthly Tranquility, where their wedding night would take place. However, 16-year-old Puyi, who was reportedly very timid and probably homosexual, could not face the situation and ended up running away from the bridal chamber, leaving behind Wanrong and Wenxiao. Despite the incident, Puyi got along very well with his empress. Much like his own education under Johnston, she had received a Western education from an American tutor, Miss Isabel Ingram. The imperial couple appreciated Western culture and reportedly spent much time riding their bicycles together in the Forbidden City. As Puyi slowly grew up, he became more and more independent. The young monarch gradually began rejecting Qing tradition. For example, he cut his queue, one of the greatest symbols in the Manchu tradition, causing strong controversy within the court. He also came to understand the realities of a decaying Forbidden City within the Republic of China. For the last few years, a great number of eunuchs serving the palace had been stealing jewels, works of art and luxury furniture to sell them on markets in Beijing. Advised by his tutor Johnston, Puyi ordered that an inventory of all objects of the Forbidden City be created to monitor and prevent theft. However, during the night of the 27th of June 1923, eunuchs set fire to the Palace of Established Happiness, where many pieces were stored. They then claimed that all the objects lost had in fact been destroyed in the fire. For Puyi, this was one affront too many. Outraged about the lack of respect and corruption of his servants, the emperor ordered all remaining 1100 eunuchs to be expelled and banned forever from the Forbidden City. The imperial court, however, reasoned him into letting a few dozen remain for maintenance and service, so that the Forbidden City could keep functioning. However, after this event, most of the Forbidden City fell into desolation. Apart from the main palaces and halls, most buildings were closed down. Weeds grew everywhere, as paint on the walls wore off. A few months later, another groundbreaking event would mark a turning point for Puyi. On the 1st of September 1923, the Empire of Japan was struck by the Great Kanto earthquake, a huge earthquake of magnitude 8 which claimed over 100,000 casualties in Tokyo and surrounding cities. The urban zones were devastated, and despite its prosperity, Japan needed aid. Puyi, advised by Johnston, who appreciated the Japanese system, decided to make vast donations for Japanese relief programs, which was greatly appreciated. Japanese delegates went to the Forbidden City the following month to personally thank the emperor on behalf of Japan. They reportedly rapidly understood that the young man would be easy to influence and manipulate in the future, and would keep a close eye on him from then on. In 1924, Literature Nobel Prize winner and prominent Bengali philosopher and composer Rabindranath Tagore visited China, giving lectures to young Chinese intellectuals. As he was curious about the Forbidden City, Puyi invited him for a visit, and they briefly exchanged. The microcosm of the Qing dynasty within the Republic of China was bound to come to an end. As I explained, Yuan Shikhai's death in 1916 had plunged the nation into a state of constant civil war, which was still raging throughout China. On the 23rd of October 1924, when Puyi was 18 years old, warlord Feng Yuxiang seized Beijing in yet another coup. After having taken control of the government, he revoked the arrangement between the Republic of China and the Qing dynasty, allowing the imperial court to remain within the Forbidden City. On the 5th of November 1924, Feng Yuxiang's troops stormed the grounds and gave Puyi and his court 3 hours to pack up and leave. For the first time since its construction 504 years earlier, the Forbidden City became emperorless. It would be turned into a museum the following year. The last two former concubines of past emperors still alive actually refused to go. They would finally be pushed out 2 weeks later. Puyi, his empress and concubine, and a few servants were now on the street without a plan. Initially, they relocated at the residence of Puyi's father, Daifeng, Prince Chun's mansion, his birthplace. Since Daifeng had many children, Puyi could meet his other siblings and see his brother Pujie again. Johnston parted ways with his student and returned to British service. Puyi would however not stay long alongside his father. Just a few days after having settled at Daifeng's residence, he was convinced by the Japanese to relocate the imperial court in exile to the Japanese legation in Beijing, as they guaranteed his protection there. He would celebrate his 19th birthday with the Japanese. This was however only a start. As they tried to gradually gain complete influence over Puyi, they persuaded him to relocate to another area where they would have even more control. In February 1925, Puyi boarded a train from Beijing to Tianjin. In this city, many foreign nations held concessions, areas in which the nation's laws were applied and where they were free to build. By relocating Puyi to its concession, the Empire of Japan had gained complete control over him. Worried about being identified and arrested during the trip, he dressed in civilian clothes and managed to avoid detection despite being surrounded by warlord troops in the train. The ex-emperor arrived safely in Tianjin and would soon be joined by his entourage. From this point on, a huge array of figures would visit him in Tianjin, including his former tutor Sir Reginald Johston. Most visitors, however, came to ask for money. These ranged from princes of the imperial clan, prominent Qing aristocrats, former eunuchs, and even journalists offering to write pro-Qing articles in the newspapers. More significantly, warlords would also visit him, asking Puyi to finance their military campaigns and promising to restore him to the throne in exchange. Zhang Zuolin, master of the Fangtian clique, nicknamed the Old Marshal, was the first to visit him in June 1925. He reportedly kowtowed to Puyi and flattered him to obtain large sums of money. Zhang Zuolin would successfully capture Beijing the following year in yet another coup, but would never communicate with Puyi again. Zhang Zongchang, the dog-meat general, would also convince Puyi to give him large sums of money, followed by White Russian General Grigory Semyonov. None of them would deliver on their promises. In addition to these deceptions, an event of the Civil War would enrage and disgust Puyi and the Qing court more than anything. In 1928, bandit warlord Sun Jianying organized the looting of the eastern Qing tombs, where Emperor Qianlong, Empress Dowager Cixi, and other nobles from the Qing dynasty had been buried. Their coffins were desecrated, and many precious treasures were stolen. Puyi was shocked and demanded an intervention from the nationalists, who were technically in charge of Sun Jianying. Ultimately, nothing was done about the issue, and as a result, the former emperor completely broke ties with all Chinese authorities forever. As the struggle between warlords continued to shake China, Puyi was reportedly very bored in the Japanese concession of Tianjin. He developed an obsession with the Western way of life, entertaining himself by buying luxury products from the West, such as watches, fashionable clothes, radios, pianos, all while dreaming of restoration. At the same time, his marriage with Wanzhong slowly began to falter. The empress, who had a charming and extroverted character, constantly wanted to escape the monotony of the court and exile and go out to jazz clubs. She occasionally had violent arguments with her husband. Unable to leave and forced to attend interminable ceremonies, she felt completely trapped and hopeless. Eventually, Wanzhong fell into recreative opium consumption. Puyi, who had gradually stopped caring about her, did not react, even later stating that he found her more manageable when she took the drug. Moreover, his concubine Wenxiu, in who he had never really taken interest at all, was not treated any better. Feeling abandoned and disrespected, and thinking she was wasting her youth, she reportedly often cried and occasionally engaged in self-harm. By mid-1931, Wenxiu decided to file for a divorce from the deposed emperor, greatly shocking the Qing court. Nonetheless, Puyi consented, and Wenxiu was eventually granted the divorce, becoming the only concubine in the history of the Qing dynasty to do so. The gap she left at the court would not remain empty for long. The most unexpected person would soon begin regularly visiting Puyi in his residence. Shanqi, Prince Su, the Qing prince who had founded the unsuccessful royalist party after the Xinhai Revolution, had many daughters, who were therefore all members of the imperial clan. One of them, Jin Bihui, was adopted by a Japanese friend, Kawashima Naniwa. In reality, this man worked as a spy for the Japanese intelligence services. After taking in his friend's daughter, he named her Kawashima Yoshiko. She would however be better remembered by her Chinese courtesy name, Dongzhen, Eastern Jewel. After having divorced from an arranged marriage with a young Mongolian aristocrat, she lived for several years in China, then Japan, with both male and female lovers. Eventually, Eastern Jewel encountered a prominent Japanese intelligence officer. Whether it be by patriotism or the thrill of adventure, she decided to gather information for him, eventually becoming a full-on spy for the Japanese. The Japanese still had close views on Puyi, and as Eastern Jewel was a member of the Qing imperial clan, she was the perfect candidate to go and watch and influence him. Puyi, respecting the rules of politeness and family, always welcomed her upon her visits to Tianjin. It was not long before he trusted her completely. In mid-September 1931, the Imperial Japanese Army, driven by imperialist views of expansion, conspired to justify war goals on China. During the night of the 18th of September, Japanese agents secretly blew up a section of the Japanese-owned South Manchuria Railway and then accused the Chinese of the event. The Imperial Japanese Army then flooded Manchuria with dozens of thousands of troops. Since the Republic of China was still in a state of civil war, now opposing the nationalists and the communists, it did not send troops to defend the region, and most local garrisons withdrew without fighting. Consequently, the Japanese successfully took control of all of Manchuria, a first step in their plan to gradually take over the whole of East Asia. Contrarily to Korea many years earlier, they could not annex the territory directly. They therefore decided to create a puppet state, which would be named Manchukuo or Manchukuo. A local would be placed at its head for a minimum of legitimacy. The perfect candidate was evident. Puyi, an ethnic Manchurian, had long expressed his wish to reclaim power and rule once more. He had been groomed by the Japanese since his eviction from the Forbidden City and completely trusted them. General Doihara Kenji, head of the local Japanese army who had organized the Mukden incident and subsequent invasion of Manchuria, paid a visit to Puyi in Tianjin in early November 1931. He urged the deposed emperor to take the position, convincing him that this was the perfect opportunity to finally reclaim the throne and restore the imperial might of his ancestors. Most of the Qing court in exile, such as Puyi's old tutor Chen Baochen, but especially Empress Wanrong, realized that the Japanese were not to be trusted and desperately tried to convince Puyi to refuse. However, Japanese spy Eastern Jewel, who he trusted, was able to finally persuade him. Puyi had made his choice. He was going to be emperor once more. Thank you for watching my video, I hope you enjoyed it. If so, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions or requests, feel free to leave them in the comment section below.